T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey, my friends, welcome to the Launch Sequence Podcast. Another week, another good time, another good talk. Today, we're going to be bringing you some more Star Citizen discussion. I've got my friend here and return guest on the show, Tree0311, a fellow roadmap watcher, a host of the podcast himself, a Star Citizen addict, much like all of us, and somebody who's just interested in 4.0 and the Crusader Intrepid and IAE ships, which, wow, happens to be the subject for today. Hey, how you doing, dude? Thank you for joining me.
I'm doing good. Glad I could make it on. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a busy time for Star Citizen. Like the time between CitizenCon and IAE is like the most rambunctious of weeks for this game, for feature talk, and I think digesting everything that came from CitizenCon while also trying to get ready for all the new ships at IAE. It's a lot going on, so we're gonna sort of split the difference today. Obviously,
rambunctious is a very good adjective.
it's a nice one. It's nice when you can flip that one into proper speech. It feels good. No, we're gonna split the difference. We're gonna talk about ships. We're going to talk about, instead of CitizenCon though, 4.0, which I think is the other big point going on right now. By the time a lot of people are watching this or listening to this podcast, 4.0 might be in PTU. And that marks a pretty big turn for this game. It is a goal that I keep saying it all year. It's a goal they set out basically in 2016. They confirmed it actually in 2018, and it's taken them 6+ years to get here. So now that it's in PTU, it's a fairly big deal, and it's going to be interesting to see how it actually affects the game, if it has an immediate effect, and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss what to think going into this stage. But first, IAE and the Crusader Intrepid. This one, oh boy, this is like it's like being the student that comes into class on the first day of school in like third grade, and you're a little nervous. And you're like, okay, I've heard good things about this school. Everybody's really, really intense and passionate, but I'm pretty good. I'm a pretty smart kid. And you walk in, and everybody's like, ugh, get that thing out of here.
You show up at lunch, and like everybody else hates tuna, and you've got a tuna sandwich,
and you are tuna.
Yeah,
yeah, man.
Poor Ben Curtis. Oh man.
This was one of the more decried releases of a ship, and it's for different reasons. I think a lot of it is around the looks. It's not even
released yet.
Yeah. Well, hey, not released yet means they have chances to fix it, to change it a little bit, which from what I'm seeing this morning, it looks like they did. So give me your sort of first impressions of the Crusader Intrepid, and where you think they can go with this ship after the popular consensus.
The Crusader ships are known for like a big footprint, or an oversized footprint for what they do. And so I think that puts like every Crusader ship at a bit of a disadvantage compared to other ships in its size class. But I like the shape language, and asymmetry has never been my thing, but I think it pulls it off nicely. That they did listen to community feedback and give it an upgunning, and went from a size 3 to a size 4, which helps it a little bit. It's not a combat ship, but at least you have a bit more oomph with it.
Yeah.
I think and I really like the interior. Crusader is not my design language, but I understand why people like it. I'm an Anvil guy. Everybody has their own thing. It's all subjective. But I think it's the interior is, like, in terms of the living quarters, is great. And to have the same sort of essential functionality of the Sulan and the the Nomad, I think is fantastic. Yeah. It's a bit more space, a bit more usability than a cutter, and obviously other ships that are a little bit smaller. And so I think it's really got that going for it. I like what you said in your review, how the stairs are nice, not having to do a ladder animation that can get broken so easily, especially if you're on different surfaces. I feel like that's probably a plus for it. It's kind of a weird contrast how we went from the Polaris getting added to PTU and everybody seeing that and just the absurd amount, and I'm not complaining, of surface texture greebling on the exterior, to where the exterior on a lot of the flat surfaces for the Intrepid compared to the Spirit, compared to the MSR, it feels like pretty matte. It's almost like there's a level of detail that isn't loading in or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
The Star Citizen community is a bunch of greebling sluts. What I've learned.
Yeah, we like our absurd levels of detail in our screenshot simulator.
Yeah.
And I think 8SCU is good, but I think if you're going to balance it's got a bit more SCU against the fact that it only has one size 1 shield and then the one gun, I feel like getting it not quite to Nomad size probably would have, like we talked about this before, but the little cargo covers inside really restrict how much cargo you can fit on those lifts. And it's like, it's 8SCU, but when you go inside and actually look at it, you're like, oh, there's like plenty of room up here for another 4 on each side, which could get you to 16. And then that lets you stick with that ship a bit longer. If that's like your sort of advanced starter, you can do larger cargo runs, you can carry a bit more commodities in it. Whatever you're using it for, it gives you a little bit more flexibility. So it's, unless those sort of covers on the cargo have some sort of function. Like I was secretly hoping that they were like the MSR, where you've got each one of them is a shielded cargo cover, and it's baby's first smuggling ship, but there's no indication of that. And so it's rule of cool that handicaps the ship in terms of balance.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on the interior. I love the interior of this ship, and I think it's really close to what I've been looking for out of a ship. I mean, I said in the video, like it's right there. I need the bare essentials. I want a ship that gives me some space to move around, that maybe I can have one other person in there with me for temporary trips. And I think maybe it's missing a room. Like, I like the feeling that it's basically like the top part of a Mercury Star Runner chopped off. How many of us just wanted that? Back when they were doing the MSR, how many of us just wanted the MSR as it was sold in the concept? Yeah, the servers and the data running stuff is kind of an extra, and I think some people would like to do without it, but let's just say that's removed. You get 2 rooms, a cockpit, some cargo, an engineering room, and a hallway. And that's it. And I feel like that's almost what this ship is. And then they go and they undergun it a little bit. I didn't know when I was going over it that it was undergunned because I'm not paying attention to that kind of stuff. But from what I've seen, that's a big part of the reaction, not just on the stats, but also the looks. And it's good that they've brought that up from a size 3 to size 4. We'll see if that, makes it a little bit more viable. But the cargo is what really hurts me. I was really hoping for a 16 SCU to put it like in a just like a really nice spot right below the Nomad. The Nomad, I think, carries 24 SCU.
Yeah, I think that's right.
The 135C, which I originally thought this maybe would compete with after seeing like the stairs and stuff and the relative size. It's like, okay, maybe it's like a 135 C competitor and it can carry some of that cargo just like that can, but that thing only has 6 SCU. Then you go up to a 300i, which surprisingly is the same length as this. I thought this thing looked a decent amount bigger, and I guess it's got that width to it in the back that helps. But the 300i, 8 SCU. So like, it's interesting
with
to
a
me
bunch
that
more firepower and
but also less interior space. And that kind of shows just how like ships have been constructed. The 300i, like the back half of that ship is thruster. So you're looking at 2 ships that are almost the same size. One of them's got like a hallway and an extra room in it, and the other's just a single room that shares its space with the cockpit. And it I guess if they had given this 8 more SCU, it would have really stomped on the 300i. But at the same time, I think that having that weapon downside to it would have made more sense. They're like, hey, this thing's got a little bit more storage, a little more space than a ship that's clearly bigger than it, that probably costs more or maybe about the same as it. The 300 is $60. They could be like, well, you know what? You're getting that cargo. You're getting that extra space, that living space. Yeah, you're going to have a little bit of an undersized gun, but it's a starter. They've all got their downsides. Like, they all have reasons that we wouldn't take him. And I think I would have preferred if this one was like the downside was the weaponry, the upside was the cargo capacity.
Yeah, it's a Crusader ship. It's not it's not the Ares. It's a Crusader ship like a C1, like a C2. It's baby's introduction to the C1 and the C2 essentially, in my opinion. Yeah, you've got that sort of stratification, which I think really would work if you started off at 16, because then you go from 16 to 64, from 64 to 600, and it lets you. It doesn't feel like you're going to be restricted to that ship for essentially 2 months before you're ready to graduate based off of your reputation of running cargo missions to something bigger. Yeah, I do. I like that they have opened it up on PTU and are getting feedback before release. I think that even though some of the feedback has been harsh for the ship team, I think it's important for them to get that feedback before release and allow them to take care of a few things, like and maybe even like some people were speculating that they undergunned it just to see what the community reaction was, and it's like that's not necessarily a bad idea. You're essentially polling the community, and yeah, sometimes the community isn't subtle in their feedback, but it's important for them to get that feedback. It just I feel like the ship team didn't necessarily hit the mark in terms of where the ship's strengths were compared to other ships of its actual size. And I feel like as much as someone put the love and effort and work into the animations and putting in those little cargo covers, just rip them out, make it 8 on each side. And the other thing that and this is a thing that they can change, but stats wise, it does. Last I checked, it had more fuel, and so better range both in terms of atmo or maneuvering hydrogen fuel, but also more quantum fuel, which is another, I think, feels like a Crusader thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's speculation, but it's always been my hope that Crusader ships will handle really well in atmosphere and take advantage of the. And this is another one of those features that, where's the update on? Where is it, Yogi? Is the atmospheric flight system? Because I feel like Crusader ships should just absolutely sip in atmosphere, and damn near coast to come into the outpost to land and drop off cargo and pick up, compared to, the Drake equivalent. But that's just
falling
speculation.
in style.
And until we have that and are able to compare that as terms of what we want and what's the price point, it's kind of hard to see where it fits.
Yeah, and they call it a starter. I'm partial to the way that they do that, because obviously there are starter ships. There's a starter class of ships that are meant to be the sort of minimum viable to do most of the things in the game that aren't specialized. So I get that as a label, but I do hope that there are reasons to keep this ship. You mentioned, working through this ship and making it last a certain amount of time before moving on to something else. I do hope that they are actively considering the future of the game, the content they're making, and reasons for why we would want to keep small ships and not necessarily just focus on going bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger for every upgrade. Because I want a reason to have to fly this on a specific mission in some specific area, or even, I want deterrence to encourage me maybe to fly this instead of something else in certain areas, because I know it'll make a difference in my gameplay. Something else you mentioned, doing this to get feedback from the community. I agree, it's good and it helps, but also we don't really know what the plans are. And they do. Like, the fact that they dropped this in with a size 3 gun could have something to do with something that they want to do in the future. Not saying it will, but if it did, I don't think they'd tell us. Like, that's not really their way. Like, if they do something and they're like, oh yeah, we're doing this because there's going to be a change in 6 months, they just do it and then wait for us to find out about that change. So I guess the fact that they made any change to this ship means that there was nothing, set in place to run alongside that. But I do wonder, when we're giving feedback without the whole view of how this game is going to work, where how that affects the path forward.
And the feedback threads that they put up, it's the generic feedback thread.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when you're, this is kind of like a focus group thing. You're releasing it out to the focus group to get some feedback on it. Well, whenever you do a focus group test, and you're getting your feedback from them, it's a focus group. You're focused on things, and it shouldn't be just, oh, here's the ship. Here are particular things we're looking for feedback on. We are undecided on this. Like we were thinking, size 3 gun size. Maybe if it's a little bit guided, in order to not leave so much open to interpretation and maybe negative interpretation. Because people, if you're able to say, hey, this ship is still in development. It's not quite released yet, but we wanted to get your feedback, in regards to this, and this, especially if you can, like you said, frame it within an overall goal. I think that would be helpful in getting more constructive and directed feedback. But yeah, like you said, it's hard to know, because we don't have a really strong direction for a lot of things.
Yeah. This ship, as it is, might survive, might live quite well in this game. Obviously, everybody's going to be waiting for the price point on it. It has benefits and downsides that I think put it anywhere from $60 to $50, but I would definitely say it's like right there. For 50 to 65, I would say is probably going to be the out of game price for something like this. But again, it'd be weird. You could see this thing coming in as expensive as a 300i. It's just like the pricing gets more and more weird in those lower levels as they bring in more ships.
Yeah. I'm glad for more advanced starters. That's the long and short of it.
So like, it's good that they're balancing out and fleshing out this part of the game and bringing in more ships that people can use earlier on. But a lot of people probably are just as always, IAE is the time when you're introducing a lot of new ships. There are two groups of people who I think are important to listen to at this point. People who are asking how many more ships. You guys keep on just, flooding out ships, and people who are asking, when are you going to start to focus more on the backlog at these events than the new ships? How do you think they've been doing so far in terms of delivering ships over the last, let's say, 2 years, when it comes to backlog, when it comes to, is it too many? Is it too few? What's your take on the ship situation overall right now?
If you look at the backlog, you have to look at the big ships in the backlog that are, what are they being blocked by? And and John Cruz talked about it. They've talked about it multiple times. Does putting this into production make sense at this time? And as much as we hate to hear it, putting the RSI Orion into production right now doesn't make sense. We don't have that kind of mining yet. It's going to be a different level of mining, an order of magnitude greater than what we have. It isn't just going to be breaking up the rocks that we have right now. They said that verbatim. So that sucks. It totally sucks. It hurts. It hurts big bad. That people's ship that they pledged for ages ago is being held back by a level of gameplay that, when are we going to see that? Because that's the other thing, is they've said that they try to align ships with gameplay. That's why the Legionnaire got kicked back. It isn't even on the silhouette view for this next 12 months. And I think they did that because they don't know, they didn't want to commit to it like they did last year, because they don't know when the gameplay team is going to circle back around to hacking gameplay when. So it's good that, hooray, the Pioneers going into production, not releasing next 12 months, going into production, folks. And so that's a big one on the backlog, that's 2016. And we just got another 2016 ship with the Polaris. We're about to. That's a huge deal. And then the Apollo is on the silhouette view, which is encouraging, but they said that they redid the reconcept of the Apollo. Was it this time last year when they were mentioning the monthly reports?
Did they? Did they talk about reconcepting it?
It was
I thought they
something to
got
do
to
with white box.
Yeah, they got to white box with it.
Yeah, but it wasn't like a big reconcept, but in terms of, okay, we're going to go through, we'll build the white box with the new metrics since we haven't done anything with it since it was concepted. So that's encouraging, but is it going to be the way of the Legionnaire? Yeah, are they just going to release it with the medical gameplay we have, or are they coming back around to more medical gameplay? Because we've got the Metapin, the Hospiturtle, the Carapin, whatever you want to call it.
Hospiturtle.
So I think that they are making progress on the backlog, but at the same time, is that progress equal to the additions too? And I think that because they are also putting in the Ironclad into production, and the Perseus and such, I think that they're making the rate of additions of concepts to the backlog is slightly less than the rate of production, which is good, but it doesn't mean the backlog will get done as soon as we would like. But I don't think that's on the ship team. Like, the ship team is probably up to like 4 dozen people now, and they have the capacity to make a lot of ship tonnage, but they are very much restricted in terms of the backlog with the gameplay teams. And that's the question we need to be I feel like that's the question we need to be asking ourselves is, where is the gameplay for those ships on the backlog? Not necessarily ship, because whole D, whole E, with what they're doing with MISC, they could crank those ships out, in no time flat. But does it make sense for those ships to exist in a Star Citizen with 2 or 3 systems? No.
I don't think it does, and I am in agreement that they need to have ships that they come in based on their gameplay, but specifically for those ships, I'm stuck between two, I think, schools of thought. First is like, obviously the whole D and hull E aren't gonna you're not gonna be able to fill one of those up in the game right now. We don't have the skill for that, like you're saying. We don't have the star systems, but at the same time, we know they can make those ships. And we know that for the most part, they're probably not going to change based on gameplay because the whole C is already in and it works off of a similar system. And people
works is generous.
yeah. But people have spent money on those ships, and it would be nice for them to be able to have a tangible thing to use. Tangible, I say it's in a video game, but like to be able to use a ship that they paid money for. Yes, they have things that have been lended in place. The Hull C is a good one, basically the same kind of ship. But I'm looking at the backlog, and in 2015, the only ships needed to be delivered from that are the whole series. The whole B, I could see being something that'd be useful to deliver, but like you said, the whole D and E could take a little while. But then you go back behind that and you look at like 2012. The only concept that needs to be delivered is the Idris. We know that's coming with Squadron. 2013, the only concept that needs to be delivered is the Orion or the Banu Merchantman. We have some idea of both of those ships, what's going on there. 2014, Javelin, Genesis, Starliner, Endeavor, and Crucible. Those are like 3 ships that I actually am like, okay, I don't know when those would be coming. But if you keep going up the list, 2016, Polaris was the only concept. It's gone. 2017, the Pioneer is the only concept. It's in production. 2018, the Kraken, Vulcan, and Apollo were the concepts. We know that the Apollo is being worked on. The Vulcan's an interesting one, especially with drones coming up. 2019, you got
that was a thing that I had on my bingo card for citizencon for them to show us, and hey, everything's done with drones for base building, and they like, where are they?
That would have been great.
Yeah.
Vulcan, gosh, I can't believe we were waiting this long for the Vulcan too. Like, I thought the Vulcan and Vulture would come around the same time.
Favorite ships.
It's a cool ship,
and I love it. And there are a handful of things and I'm sorry, I should have let you finish, but it just made me think about it. There, pardon me, there are a handful of gameplay things that we have heard some or a lot about that we don't know the near-term future of. And I think that's what might have a lot of people angsty and probably has me a little, okay, 1.0 is great. That's a long ways away. I need to know more about this near term. And last year we had not good expectation management, but at least a good overview of what we knew what they were working on the near term. We should have known better how well that would get done, and not to, dig on CIG. They, a good amount of near-term things got in, and they've gotten a lot of work done. And I think there's a lot more coming in the near term, but there's still a lot of unknowns about, okay, 4.0 is coming soon, but what does gameplay look like for the next year? Where's the focus? We've got 1.0 added to the roadmap, but we still don't have additions to the progress tracker to show us where their focus is after all this team reshuffling. For the big gameplay things that didn't make it in this year and that really will update the experience to where they want it. Because that's my wish list is I want feature parity with Star Citizen with Squadron 42. I want that. And that will hold me over until 1.0 and make me feel a lot better about the progress of the game when we get feature parity. But we don't have a good look at what that feature parity timeline is in terms of things like radar and scanning, the new quantum travel experience, which is huge for gameplay.
So
people think
it's 12 months from last CitizenCon, don't you know?
Yeah, that was
it's the end of this year. That's the feature parity.
But I gave CIG a bit of leeway because that statement was made in a paragraph of other statements.
Yeah.
And then, so the full context of that was things that are in polishing or finished with Squadron 42, we are aiming to deliver in the next, 12 months, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Okay, sweet. You've got, 5 quarters, and you're saying the things that are polished or complete in Squadron that you're essentially showing off here. So where's the quantum travel experience? Where's radar and scanning? And where is the atmospheric flight model with
push and pull,
focus on
butt pushing, button pushing,
the EVA, the complete EVA
pushing
system,
butts.
Pushing. Hold on,
space butt tech.
Yeah, but those are big things that we've seen demonstrated that look really cool and help the game feel more complete and replace legacy systems that are really struggling. And what's the near-term future on those? Because it's I know that we'll probably get a Jared at the end of ISC for this year saying, and it's like,
I think he's not going to do that this time.
I know that that's the hard part is after CitizenCon, how many people were asking for a date or a date for this or a timeline for that, and it's like, okay, hold on. Let me go back to your videos and see you losing your mind about CIG giving you a timeline and giving you dates.
They've learned. I mean, I say they've learned. We think that every year. Like somebody who's there is definitely privy to the fact that people are pissed that they keep missing dates. Like it's this little secret that maybe wiggles its way into the offices. But like somebody there is like, we're not giving any dates. I don't care how hyped we feel, how good it feels, how much we want to do it. We're just not going to talk about it this year because look what happened with this last one. This is a new crowd that they're working with than what they used to. It's not 2019 anymore.
Yeah, and like if you go to CCU game, and you look at the here was the backer population, 2020 and before, 2020 and after. Yeah. It's the population has changed 100%. It's an entirely different backer population, and so the communication and expectation management has to shift with that. And I feel like it has, but not enough.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
If Jared could say these are the things that the gameplay teams are focused on for next year, without saying we're targeting this, our goal is this. I just want to hear that, the gameplay teams are focused, this year on are focused in the near term on this, this, and this. I'm not going to give you a Q3 or a 4.2 or whatever. I just want to know what you're working on to sort of set my expectations for this is where their focus is. And that's it. When it happens, it happens. When it gets delivered, it gets delivered. But I feel like there's still a room for a middle ground between giving dates and then nothing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely
Sorry, that was a tangent.
Understandable.
No, it was on my mind.
It's citizencon, I think, should give both an update on the long-term vision of the game, but it should also give us a view of what's happening over the next 12 months, over the next year, because that's like we have Inside Star Citizen, we have monthly reports, we have Star Citizen Live that give us a general idea of what's going on, but something that acts as that yearly check-in point for a lot of people, and that summary for the rest of us of kind of here's what we've shown you, the things that are still being worked on. Here is us distilling it down into the things that we're really focused on and what you can expect over the next year. But we didn't really get that this year. I think last year's was kind of more like that, but not this year. I think
all they mentioned was the base building and crafting, and that's like they said, that was the only date they gave, and it's like, oh God, guys, you didn't have to say that. But 12 to 18 months, but then we still have a backlog of things that they were aiming for this year, and we, I hope we get an update on that before the end of the year, or on some of the things before the end of the year, and don't just leave us hanging before they go on holiday break, because I think that you and I are similar in that the things that we're waiting on from that backlog are big ticket items for us personally, subjectively.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But I don't have high hopes. Let's pivot back towards the ships, because that is something I think I would like to analyze how people are feeling about this game when it comes to the ships versus the features. IAE is coming up, ships are important, they're getting dropped in, and like I said, starting out this sort of topic in this conversation, a lot of people will see this as something that doesn't need to be done. Stop releasing ships, finish the game. Stop releasing ships. You only, all you want to do is like sell ships, market ships, and all these kinds of things. And looking at the backlog, it's not as bad as it feels. There are some pretty big ships that need to be worked on. But one thing that has been definitely happening more over the last several years compared to before is, instead of doing a lot of concept sales where they release a ship as a picture and then they sell it years later, they're doing a lot more straight to flyable. This is what we've been working on. Here it's now in game. And do you think that overall they're just like there's too much ship stuff going on? Is the Intrepid more of too much, or is that a ship that should be in the game?
I think that we do need, and this is sort of my opinion about the game, in that the Intrepid Cutter C1 or sorry, Spirit series, Zeus series, I think those are excellent for the long-term vision of the game. And there's a lot of subjectivity within the current backer community, or at least a large portion. They're like, well, why are you making these ships? I'm not interested in this. And it's like, well, you already have your ships. You already have a lot of ships. You are not a new player, who's just coming in, starting out at 1.0. And they need to have a robust, and I feel like it's worth adding to the backlog. But the Aurora, for example, I think that they need to. It's one thing to build big ships, but it's another thing they need. The backlog also includes gold standard updates, and maybe a little bit of refactoring here to bring, because those ships need to have a place in the vision for 1.0, and because CIG is. They're definitely expecting the player population to go up substantially over the next few years on the way to 1.0, and then especially once 1.0 releases. And they need to, have the gameplay ready, but they need to have the ship catalog ready. And so even though I don't think the Intrepid necessarily exactly hits the mark, I think it's a good addition. I think we need a Intrepid from Anvil. I think we need a Zeus from Anvil, from Argo, insert ship manufacturer here. So that way the ship catalog is rounded out to cater to everybody's subjective tastes at sort of the different levels.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good thing. And you didn't form it in like your opinion, but I think the dramatic reduction in introduction of concepts, and this is one of those things where you can go back and you can look at how many concepts were added, this year versus, this year versus 5 years ago. Yeah, so many. And I think we're going to get I think we're basically at the point where we're getting a concept at the big events and not much, not really anything else. It's like 2 concepts a year, just a couple versus so much more straight to flyable or going into production. And I think that's a good thing. I just hope that I think that just my biggest hope is that the ship team isn't going to be hamstrung by the gameplay teams now that the gameplay teams are hopefully wrapping up that feature work, bringing back over from Squadron, and they can, get to work on these things that will not be blockers for the ship teams anymore. Because the in terms of blockers, like the Legionnaire, we talked about the Vulcan. Those are blocked by gameplay because the gameplay just isn't there for them. The Nautilus, is a very niche thing, but it's blocked by gameplay. And so I think that's what I want to see is, okay, show me CIG of 1,300 people who are now not focused on Squadron, what you can do in terms of gameplay and content that A, makes the game better, but B, allows these ships that people paid for, including me, ages ago, to get in and experience that ship and experience that gameplay before, the nebulous release of 1.0 at some far-flung date. I'm not as pessimistic as some people, but it's still it's still multiple years away easily.
Yeah. It's going to be a ways.
Yeah.
I think
it's better than before, but ways to go.
The starter ships definitely need to be better kept up to date, but I agree with you when it comes to these smaller ships. This is the gold zone, I call it, anywhere from like 25 to 60 meters of length. Seems like the most common use case and place for a spaceship in this game, and CIG needs to be good at focusing on creating content that encourages people to use those ship sizes. But yeah, I feel also like
especially for an MMO.
Yeah, definitely.
Your player population for an MMO is people who play solo and then will group up at random, or people who group up with a small group of friends that they play regularly with. And that's the vast majority of people doing MMO style gameplay. Isn't people going and doing a raid with multiple dozens of people. It's quick party, looking for a group of I need 2 to 3 other people, and that gets you so much. That's why the Zeus A was beautifully executed, but it caters so well to the majority of what MMO players are going to be playing at in terms of the gameplay and the number of people they'll be playing with.
Definitely. But as you said, they also need to watch out for those lower down starter ships, as they call them, the Aurora, the Mustang, even the Pisces, the 100i. We got more and more starters like the Cutter and the Intrepid coming in and making a very clear difference between something advanced like this that has an interior, that has space, that has an engineering segment and cargo grid that's inside of your ship versus something like an Aurora Mustang or a 100 series, which storage outside of your compartment. Maybe you've got a bed, maybe you don't have an interior, you don't have extra life support space for somebody to come along. So there needs to be a reason for those smaller ships too. But the Intrepid,
the lockers.
Yeah, the lockers, the suit lockers.
You just touched on it in your video. Like that's going to be a huge thing that people aren't anticipating. And you go land on a planet that's not a friendly atmosphere, and can you hot swap into your Caldera suit or something that that's a big limitation, and it's a glaring feature cutoff. The C1 or the cutter has it in the oh gosh, which variant is it that has the
Rambler?
The Rambler has the suit locker. The Intrepid now has a suit locker, and so these starter pluses, or give you the option, but that's a feature that is a sleeper that can make a big difference in your gameplay.
That's true.
With these environments.
So yeah, it's a solid ship. It fits into a good place. It might just not have the design that everybody loves so much, but we'll see where it fits in. Every game needs a couple ugly ducklings. CIG. And honestly, if everybody liked every ship, this would be a wash. There needs to be there have to be ships that people don't like, just like there have to be types of gameplay people don't like, or else we're all doing the same thing and there's no benefit to going with the other choice. So I am very appreciative of a ship that comes in and is divisive, but I do hope that if there are standards that CIG feels they need to still step up on that ship, I'm not going to be the one to say, oh, it's not enough detail or it's too flat and bulky. Like, I have my feelings of how I've seen it. But if they also realize that there's something they need to do to bring it up to a standard, I hope they do that. Otherwise, I appreciate where the ship is, and especially with this size 4 update to the gun, I hope that they can continue to tweak it and balance it and have it live in a place in the game alongside the other starters. Then we've seen the Medipin, the new medical terrapin is coming in, and I think there was one more, I guess technically the Polaris and the Starlancer are IAE ships as well.
Yeah, the Starlancer Max.
Yeah,
and the Polaris, and then I just started seeing
probably one more, right?
I think we have a concept, and I think we know what that concept is. I don't know if you've seen the mentions and leaks and whether that's legitimate or not. Pardon me, sorry, but I squealed for joy about the Metapin because that one concept image that was or fan concept that's been making its way.
My man Luai doesn't get enough credit for that picture. That thing is iconic though in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, chef's kiss. It's and so I'm hyped about it because I'm a medical gameplay guy. That is 100% my thing. And so I love Anvil. I love the Terrapin. I'm stoked that it seems to have gotten a tier 2 bed, which I think puts it in a good spot. I just hope that, and just like with the Vulcan, we've got tier 0 medical gameplay. People don't realize that what we have medical gameplay wise is so very rudimentary compared to what CIG wants to do with it. But we've got now with the Metapin and then the Apollo coming in, how many ships that are medical in focus, on top of how many ships with med beds, and we still haven't seen or heard about, okay, what's the near term for medical gameplay, because it's so important, in my opinion, that we get good repair gameplay for ships, that we also alongside it get good repair gameplay for people, because that's those two things go hand in hand, and they've mentioned that before, where it's they're equivalent. They want you to value your character as much as you value your ship, and vice versa, and try to recover them, maintain them, and so that's I'm hoping that they say something about that, since they're doing that variant and that they're doing the Apollo essentially in the near future. But yeah,
if the Apollo comes without better medical gameplay, I'm going to be so heavily confused, distraught, and disappointed. Of like waiting that long, and like it's really we were just waiting for drones. You guys didn't have anything else to do with medical for the Apollo. Like, just hold off on that ship if you don't have any updates to medical gameplay at that point, I think, because I agree with you. Right now, medical is just respawning on a different ship.
Yeah, it's sort of a cop out in saying, well, the gameplay is there, and it's like, no, it's really not. And it's they don't want to introduce ships without gameplay, and it's like, okay, tier 0 is there, but then to have so many ships that still only have a tier 0 gameplay, you know, it kind of sucks, especially for um, people who are really into that gameplay, and the fact that nobody uses medical beacons. And I don't think the increase in server populations is going to change that very much. Um, at least in the near term, because people don't want to wait, and until they have incentive to not wait, or incentive to wait, and until there's more gameplay to go with that, it just feels like a hollow release to me. And some people are of the opinion, I've got plenty of those people in my server that say, no, I just want my ship. And it's like, yeah, but you're not. There's a lot of people that then get the ship and then complain because they want the gameplay. Like, oh god, reclaimer. I don't want more reclaimers, regardless of the size.
There's no point. Like, CIG shouldn't just be pushing out ships to push out ships. A lot of people think that they're just making ships to make money, and I will obviously agree that they will make ships to appeal to whatever is like the common thing of that time period. Like, if there's things going on and they think, oh, we can encourage gameplay in that sector and then add a ship to capitalize on that gameplay, they'll do it. We see that with racing, and I think they've gone even a little bit far with the racing with the Peregrine and things like that. But the last thing we want is for them to start at getting past the point of, oh, we want to make choice for players in different areas, and more just like, we're just popping out ships. I mean, some people think that's what's already happening, and obviously not considering where a ship fits into the game and then just putting it out there can be detrimental to the game's health, to the progression of the game going forward. A lot of people will say, oh, they've sold what progression there is in the game this whole time. That's kind of ruined it. And we know that's not necessarily true, but like they got to be careful about just putting ships out there and people having no tangible reason to want that ship. And a lot of people, I think, saw that with the Intrepid, and kind of have that like early backer brain that you talked about, where you're not going to be the person at 1.0. You can't, like, maybe you're missing when somebody might find that interesting coming into the game as a new player, and seeing a different design and some slight different changes. But if you're just releasing medical ships that are just different chassis built around the same medical beds, even if that's going to make a difference at some point in the future when you change medical gameplay, it kind of stomps on that statement that you're not releasing you're only releasing vehicles with working gameplay. Because like, medical's working, but is it really working?
Yeah.
Just lay
Are
in the
you
bed.
doing any gameplay by bringing the ship along and letting people set their spawn point beforehand? Yeah. Is that really gameplay? Okay, well, I got a tier 3 injury in this bunker, and now I can go lie down and insta heal it. And it's like, it doesn't feel good as much as I want my Apollo. It doesn't feel great. And the release of the hull munching, and like how they said that this isn't the final version, but we just wanted to get it in for you. And it's like, I get that because the Reclaimer was, but at the same time, it just doesn't feel good. And I hope they don't repeat it just to get backlog ships out.
That's like an opposite of the problem, right? Instead of releasing a ship without the gameplay, I mean, they had already done that. Instead of doing that, they like rushed. I don't want to say they rushed the gameplay. I think they made the right choice of putting out gameplay to make the ship functional, but it really goes to show just like how much of a mess it turns into when you don't have the tech to back up the ship you're selling and trying to make that work. Like, imagine they tried to do something like that with medical, where instead of, I don't know, they were going to have an injury system where you could apply a cast, but instead of doing that, you just held a light over the joint and it was magically healed. Nobody wants that. I guess that's like the whole beam citizen thing that people are worried about.
If you spend like one day in my Discord, because that's the 90% of what my Discord is the people in my Discord heckling me about the like 3 things that I'm just so dug in my heels about. And it's medical beams, what a dropship is, and oh gosh, what's the third thing? VTOLs.
Yes, VTOL, yeah.
VTOLs in the atmospheric flight model, and I totally get where they were. Gosh, when was that? Where medical game? What patch was that? Where medical gameplay
315.
came? Yeah, 315 with the hospitals and stuff, and we got the more med pens and more gear and everything. And it's like, okay, well, that gave me a little something, but that feels
ago.
like a long time ago.
Almost 10 updates.
And
major updates.
Yeah.
And there is 10 major updates because 317.2 was considered a major update. So like 315 to 324, yes, dude. Let the pain reign. It's Star Citizen, baby. That's what it is. It's pain until brief satisfaction. And honestly, I think to transition, I guess, into our second topic here, I'm gonna breeze through it a little bit, but like that's a great transition over to what else I wanted to talk about. Ships are one thing. We could talk about ships forever, folks. We're going to have like 3 more ship focused shows between Launch Sequence and Citizen Central this month because IAE is upon us. So I'm not leaving that behind for the month, but I do want to talk a little bit about 4.0 with you, Tree. And these moments that I just mentioned of revitalization. It's just these brief spikes of positivity in a project that has had to deal with a lot of headwind over the last several years. To be honest,
nautical theme, I like it.
To be honest, it feels like a lot of players have just kind of been waiting for a good win, you know, whether it was player counts going up or salvage coming in and being like some great gameplay, or persistence PES happening and everything, you know, getting some nice update, Squadron 42 features coming in. Like there are all these things that kind of people expected to be like, yes, this is turning things around for me, I'm feeling good. But every time it kind of feels like it still settles back into a valley. And I'm wondering, do you feel like 4.0 will actually represent a good positive win in the community's mind? Or do you think it's just going to be another moment of brief satisfaction, and then we're right back to the general grind that is waiting for Star Citizen?
You know, we talked about the backer population is sort of divided in the people before 2020 and the people after 2020, or like that's the dividing point. I think for the people post 2020, 4.0 and server meshing is more of a win, even sans engineering and such, than the people before 2020, if that makes sense. And so I still think that people before 2020 are going to be like, at least, you know, Pyro and server meshing are out, and there's no more road to 4.0, road to Pyro.
Yeah, dude, that's like we're getting trauma removed at that point.
Because you said headwind, and all I could think about is like from sailing, where you have to tack back and forth, and you're just barely making forward progress, but you're covering so much ground in between, and that's what it feels like, because we've covered in this long road to server meshing, and a lot of people don't realize that, you know, like, oh, they just, you know, the server meshing, you know, they've been talking about that for a few years now. No. The prerequisite work for server meshing goes back to like 2014, 2015. There's so much that goes into it, and it's been such a long road, and we just need to get past that in order to finally, you know, to move forward, because it feels like a ball and chain. You know, that's holding, you know, or you're tacking back and forth with the anchor, you know, dragging across the ocean floor or something. And so I think it's a win, but more of a relief. You know, and even though the unlawful gameplay is not my spiel at all, like I'm excited to explore Pyro and see these new locations and visit the asteroid bases and, you know, try some of the new gameplay. And I think the way that CIG could put a bit more wind in the sails, if we're going to stick with the headwind and the nautical theme, would be to give us an update, because people go straight to the release view, without reading the roadmap roundup. I've realized that this is a huge problem, that people don't read the roadmap roundup. They go to the release view and they're like, what the hell happened? And it's like, well, they talk about that right here. And they say that the way that they said in the roadmap roundup that it'll return, you're
talking about engineering?
4.0 and engineering, fire, the stuff that got released.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that given that by the time 4.0 makes it to live, based off what they're targeting in December, that hopefully they will be able to give an update and be like, okay, so we've had this much more time. We've got 4.0 to live. We're able to pull back on these things. And this is, we're going to give you a short-term update on these features, for Q1 or whatever, and not leave us at the break with, so engineering. And I maybe not give a date, but say that, okay, this isn't, we've come off of engineering and we're focusing on base building for the next 12 months or something like that. Because that's there's a big, wide open, not good expectation management for those things that were cut. And I think that we need that in the near term, not a date, but just say we plan for this for the next major release. This is what we're working on. And
do you think that's what 4.0 needs to be a real win in people's minds?
Not to be a real win. I just to help recover some of the momentum that was lost, or the optimism that was lost by having, we're getting server meshing and we're getting pyro, but just give us an update. And so that way people aren't left hanging and not knowing about these things. Because even though server meshing is such a huge win, and getting our second system in jump gates is a really big deal, there are a lot of people who are really looking forward to engineering and fire and life support and all that. And I think that it's fair to not leave those people hanging in the community at large. You don't have to say that it's coming, in March, but hey, we're picking right back up on these things. We'll get them out, as soon as possible. We're not going to put them on the back. They're not on the back burner.
They can definitely not do what they did with Cargo, which was come out right after it got delayed and be like, yeah, it's not going to be 6 months, and then it takes 5 months for it to come out. Like, give us a real, either give us a real straightforward idea of like the worst case scenarios kind of thing, or just don't say anything about it, to be honest. It does come off as something.
Updates.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be every 2 weeks, but yeah.
It does feel like they kind of had a go, no-go meeting a couple weeks ago and decided that was a no-go. So maybe it's something that can go into a 4.0.1 in January or February, but I'm thinking this is something we end up seeing in March, likely, or April.
That's what I was thinking, is that the Q1 patch, which is usually more often than not lackluster, historically, that the March-April Q1 patch will be the features that got kicked, plus a few other little things, and at least that way the lead up to the Q2 patch, which is usually a lot more full, doesn't feel like it's just a handful more locations and some tiny updates. And it would give those teams essentially a whole nother quarter to get engineering where they want it, along with getting a lot of fixes and updates and optimizations in for server meshing. Take that quarter to really just play catch up. And that's what personally, that's what I would hope for. But I would also hope to not be left wondering going into the holiday break and that just void that is January about these things.
I think we're seeing two approaches with these updates, 4.0 compared to, say, 3.0, which did feel like a big win when it came out. Before 3.0, we didn't have an update for like a year, right? We didn't have a big update. We had one mid-year that did some things, but didn't really add content. Overall, 3.0 was they put down some dams. They blocked the flow. They stopped all features from coming out for like a solid 12 to 18 months and said, we are not going to release anything until 3.0 comes out. When 3.0 came out, though, suddenly you had a different mobiGlas. You had a different quantum travel, different star map, different missions, different places you could land. Planets were now a landable place. just like the Delta patch, I think, came out. Everything changed with 3.0, which made it feel like a big splash, a big win for the company. And even though the performance was really bad up until 3.3.5 or 3.3, it still felt like a very definitive shifting pivot point for the game. Now, contrast that to 4.0, and from what we're seeing from 3.23 this April to what's probably going to be 4.1 next April when they get in engineering, all of the features that were kind of, I think, ultimately meant to encompass this switchover for 4.0 were spread out between 3.23, 3.24, 4.0, 4.1. If all of those features had come out in 4.0, this would have felt like the biggest win this game had ever seen. It would have been a huge dramatic changing point. We would have seen all of our UIs change. You would have seen cargo manipulation change. New cargo missions came in. Reputation changed. Star map. Your server meshing was brought in. Yeah.
From Q1 2024 to Q1 2025. If you look at that, if you cut that and you look at that specifically, you're like, oh my gosh, look what this 12-month time span did for changing the game so dramatically. If you look at that collectively, it's far larger than 3.0.
Yeah.
And for people that have been playing for, even if you're just looking at that backer population that's post 2020, that's a massive change from what they've been used to. But because it's spread out, it really takes the wind out of the sails.
Yep.
For the hype and the optimism, because it didn't come all at once and it's been drip fed, and you take those things individually for granted.
You can see it. You could see the way it happens with 3.23. Cargo got delayed out of 3.23 and people were like, this patch is useless. There's nothing here. And then engineering got delayed from 4.0 and people are like, they removed all of the features. And I'm like, dude, they removed features for sure. And it's annoying that they're not all coming at once, but it's crazy how much there's a psychological difference in the way that you accept that, because I do think that 4.0 would be like, they could have delayed features to be in 4.0 and made the patch feel much more big. And I guess that's the psychology of marketing and the way that you're presenting this stuff is like, should they have waited to do the MFD stuff in 4.0? Should they have waited to do some of the more cargo stuff? Like if they had collapsed 3.24 and just gone all the way over to 4.0 and tried to release all that stuff in that patch, would it have been too much? Is that too much of a waiting period for like morale to go down in the fall? There's just so many questions to ask around how features are delivered. And it's why the patch numbers themselves don't really matter. But ultimately, I do wonder how things would have looked different if 4.0 was able to be made this big, winning update with all these flashing lights and this huge hype versus now, which is like between the features getting delayed to the amount of time it's taken to the fact that Evocati can be streamed and made videos of, like, it really now feels like 4.0 is just kind of riding over the finish line for a 6 to 7 year lead up.
Yeah. And nearly everybody has had the opportunity, if they wanted, to go explore at least part of Pyro. And so it's not, it's not going to feel all brand new, especially as 4.0 goes to the PTU waves. It's not, having it drip fed doesn't give it the weight that it should.
Yeah.
And even if server meshing, does well, which I don't think there's any reason to expect anything remotely close to 3.18 for server meshing. And I think it's for the very reasons that CIG has explained. But even if it does, perform pretty well at launch and everything, people won't appreciate that for what it is, because we've been getting drip fed and we've tested it for months. And the sweet server meshing is in, but where's the gameplay and the content that's been locked behind it?
Yeah,
because that's what we've been told and expected for so long. And it's now this is out of the way. Where is it?
A lot of those.
I think that's.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say in that regards, and as cool as the base building and crafting is, that's a thing where this is gameplay being made by gameplay teams. and you haven't finished on delivering the things that were going to bring Star Citizen up to feature parity and update it for, the current gen. So I see that there's all these teams focus on this stuff, but where is the rest of the stuff that you intended to deliver to give us the experience that you're intending to give us? And without those updates, that's what makes 4.0 a little bit more hollow for me. Is like I've been following server meshing with a fine-tooth comb for ages. There are a few people in the community that have read and reread the unofficial roadmap and all of its citations, unofficial roadmap to server meshing and all of its citations, like I have. But even that will feel a little bit hollow to me because it's always been about blocking. It's blocking gameplay and more systems and more locations and higher player counts. But where's the rest of the gameplay that you were already supposed to have been working on? If 4.0 is if we don't get a pretty rapid iteration on bringing up the rest of the gameplay experience up to, hooray, now we have server meshing and pyro, it's going to feel a little bit, all right, where's the rest of the cake? I want to eat the rest of the cake too.
Yeah. That I think drives a lot of how we view Star Citizen overall. If you're here as a backer and you've been following this whole project, the game's not going to be as interesting as when it comes out for somebody who hasn't been following. It's the whole new backer feeling too. People jump into the game, they're amazed for a couple weeks, and they start to see the problems. It's the same with server meshing. People who maybe didn't experience it at all or anything about it, they might not actually care, but the people who have been obsessing over it over this whole time are probably going to be whelmed because it's not doing something incredible, amazing right at the gates opening. But it's a long-term thing, and long-term things don't hit as hard when you've been following them the whole time, especially because a lot of the things that server meshing is going to make better that we've been hyped about for a long time are only made possible by server meshing. They don't get fixed at 4.0 when server meshing comes in.
It's like that meme from The Incredibles, the meme gif of, that Mr. Incredible like turns around and looks at the little kid in his tricycle and he's like, well, what are you waiting for? Something amazing, I guess.
Yeah.
Going through your jump points and visiting a new system, it's amazing, but the novelty can wear off really quickly when there's a lot of other things that are amazing to big groups of people, and those are the expectations surrounding those are not kept up.
Yeah,
we've been getting a lot of updates on Pyro, a lot of updates on server meshing. We haven't been getting, I feel like, the updates on the gameplay.
Yeah. So 4.0 at this point, by the time people are listening to this podcast, probably is not in PTU. Some of you might be listening to it later in the week, but Monday morning, it's likely not going to be in PTU just yet.
Yeah.
But looking at some of our recent tests heading into that, it's looking like they're aiming for about 4 servers or so per shard with 380 players. What do you think of this as the first? Like, if this does make it to live, 380 players across 2 star systems, do you think that offers any sort of tangible difference to people who are coming into the game?
I think it's when you look at it, if you break it down like per star system, it's doubling the player count or close to it, which it's like, depending on whether it doesn't feel like a huge thing, but they talked about how they are more concerned about delivering a good experience and it being stable and performant than they are for reaching high player counts. And I think even with, and gotta love Benoit. Benoit has been doing such a good job with communication, but it's communication in a platform that doesn't reach the overwhelming majority of people with his Spectrum posts. And so some people cover it, but it doesn't. It's not something that the message doesn't meet or reach the majority of backers. And so people just hear the Cliff Notes version of 1,000, 2,000 players, and they don't hear about the expectation management that goes along with it of, well, we're just testing this in order to figure out where it breaks, to find those points where we can optimize and fix things, so that way they can make that 500, what they kept on rolling it back to, the 400, 500, 600 players, whatever you want to, whatever they're doing, so they can make that work right. Mm-hmm. And here we are. And I think that 380 is I don't think that's what's going to go to live, but I think that it's what we need in order to get 4.0 and server meshing out, in order to test things in a live environment, because we know that you don't get the concurrency that you need in PTU to really test these things. And even though the tech previews have been giving them great data, and even though I am pretty certain that they're using the headless clients, the Linux testing, I forget what they call it now, to sort of fake a lot of client connections, it isn't going to replicate what live does. And so I think, and they've talked about this, they need to get it to live in order to get the data they need in order to find additional pain points and optimizations to keep moving forward on server meshing development. But I think if we're at 380 versus, even in tech preview, they were rolling it back to 500, 600 dang near every time with more than 4, it feels very under minimum viable product. And I'm sorry, I gotta pause for a second because the coffee's running through me. And give me 1 sec, I'll be right back. I gotta
No problem. Just to, I guess, say my own part on this, with the player count that they want to get up. I think that stability is the most important part of this. If they're going to move forward with server meshing and we're going to get 4.0 and something, they got to shoot for something here, right? I think more than raising the player count, going back to our earlier conversation about the way that people feel like 4.0 might be a big win or not, stability in this game would feel like a big win for people. If we went from 3.24 running the way that we know the game to run right now, and we have known the game to run for years past, to 4.0, and guys, this is theoretical, okay? This is hypothetical. This is not going to happen. But if we went from that to 4.0 being a game that you can reliably play and not expect to crash out of, fall through the floor of, randomly die because of silly things. Like if server meshing came in and actually just made the game feel like a stable experience, I'm not talking perfect release ready, I'm talking not the game that we've had all this time, I do think that people will remember 4.0 as a big win. Despite the features, despite the ships, despite the major milestones that might want to be hit in 4.0, if the game ended up just being stable, I think that would be enough for people to look at 4.0 and say, this was a major moment in Star Citizen, and I'm glad that we met it.
Yeah. The stability is the biggest part, because they can't wow you with high player numbers. That the high player numbers and the bigger shards and everything would totally fall flat if it just didn't work. And so it's much more important for it to be stable. I think part of it is they've consistently talked about performance improvements with server meshing, and they haven't framed that in the context of server meshing in 4.0 versus server meshing after 4.0. And I think that's the part, is people don't realize that this is the minimum viable product for server meshing. This isn't what they're targeting. This is in order to get it out to live, to test it, to continue development on it, and get it to dynamic in a timely manner, which is going to give us the performance that they are really targeting. And that's, I think, the part that is probably going to fall flat, because Benoit's been saying it, gameplay people have been saying it, they've all been talking about, the performance is going to improve. And so people are automatically expecting 30 server FPS. And I'm like, with the minimum viable product, I don't think that's what I don't think that's the appropriate expectation. And that's what this is. If you go back to, there was a letter from the chairman in 2021, I think it was, that had that 22, the one with the timeline.
Yeah.
And if you look at that timeline, the timeline was wrong, but all the points on that timeline have come to fruition. So the timeline they've stuck with the plan. It just has the time in between each point in time is elongated due to delays and such. But the minimum viable product was was 4 DGS across 2 systems, and here we are, 4 DGS across 2 systems. And so that's what we're getting, the minimum viable product. And based off that configuration and the player counts, I don't think a 30 FPS server is what players should be expecting. I think that it's going to be better, but I think that people aren't going to be satisfied with 15 FPS consistently when they've been hyping themselves up for 30.
It's better than 4.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I'll take that.
And that's the thing is we should be happy that with 4.0 you can consistently get double-digit frames, because under double-digit frames is where the experience goes to crap, and you get way more bugs and way more instability. And but it's if everybody's been in these tech previews and watching everybody cover it and seeing 30 FPS, it's locked at 30 FPS. And
he's talking about server side, by the way, folks, not client side.
Yeah, not client side. Sorry, server in the server FPS on the dedicated game server. Especially with all the messaging, of how we're going to get improved performance, and it's like, well, they're talking about improved performance, much higher performance when we get to dynamic. And this is a big step, and the road to dynamic shouldn't be long, but I think people have overhyped themselves on what 4.0 is.
It's what we do.
And so they're not, and so we're going to have a lot of people who aren't going to be as excited and happy with what we get for 4.0, because the expectation management, even though it's better from CIG, still misses the mark.
I hope that it's more performant in line with what they've been saying. Like I hope there's a noticeable improvement. Maybe it's not perfect, but
I think it's definitely going to be noticeable. But I think that like for me, if I hop in a game server and I'm getting double-digit FPS on that game server, I'm stoked. I'm like, I'm going to have a good session. When I have consistently, it's hanging around at 12 to 16 FPS. I won't have almost no issues with the game.
Yeah.
It's
at that point it's just it's a slow game, not a absolute show. Yeah,
exactly. But I think too many people have hyped themselves about 30 FPS and having the AI just be having cat-like reflexes, when it's like, I don't know if that's the right expectation, and I don't think CIG has communicated that very well.
It's as it goes. It's tradition.
Yep, it's going to be good, and I think it's one of those things where we get over things, or the majority of the community will get over. If it launches and servers are consistently 15 FPS, and people will be like, I thought we were getting 30, where's my 30? And they'll forget about it in 2 weeks, and they'll enjoy playing it over, people enjoy playing it over the break, and people will have a good experience, and there will be that subset of the community that's still angry in January, that was angry in February and March and, all year long. But I think the majority of people will be pleased with it. I just, looking back, I think, when the community as a whole is looking back at the launch of 4.0, that they're not going to look as fondly as I would have hoped that they did.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, it would have been good, but if there's one thing that's always true with this project, it's that you're not always going to hit the targets you aim for. In fact, you're just never going to. Sorry about it. Get used to it, folks. We're making progress, but it's definitely not the progress that we all want.
We're tacking against the wind. We've got a headwind. We're in a sailboat again in a headwind.
All I know is this is a big moment. 4.0 might not be the biggest win that we're hoping for. It might not be the second coming of 3.0 to change the game. It might not even, unlock the game as people are really expecting it to in terms of their capabilities. But I do think that whatever does happen, everything shifts after 4.0. Whether it is our own outlook on the game because it's not doing as well as it should, it's doing better than it should, whatever it is, the fact that server meshing is getting added and the game's back end, which has been the thing that's held this game back for such a long time, is finally taking a big step forward. All conversations change after the end of this year from, oh, we got to wait for this, we got to wait for that, we're looking forward to this, to, okay, this is in place now. What are the things you guys are actively doing to make these things happen? How is the game coming together? So I'm looking forward to that shift for sure.
Oh yeah,
and
it's a big step that we really need to take.
Yeah,
and it allows everything to be looked at in a different light. Like you said, the things change after this. And that people are still going to be pessimistic or optimistic and stuff like that, but it allows us to at least not have to still look at this part of the conversation in this light. You get to look at these things. Okay, we are now in the post server meshing development phase of Star Citizen, and there's some uncertainty about it, but there's a lot of cause for optimism and for feel good.
And it looks like, from what I'm seeing, we might be seeing a PTU today. So, right, this is what always happens almost every week. I record a podcast and then some big news comes out in some random place right as we're finishing up or right after it's done. So you guys,
at least we're not doing it live on stream and then everybody just evaporates to go download 4.0 and PTU.
Everybody who's listening, y'all now have 2 days of context that we are missing in 4.0's PTU. Mm-hmm. So let us know how it's going in the comments below.
I have to make the decision of, do I download 4.0 and start playing as soon as it goes live, or do I wait because I've got a new motherboard and a new 9800X3D arriving today? And I'm like, oh,
choices.
I want to play with I want to play it with a 9800X3D, but
or you could play PTU with your old system and live with the new system to make live feel a little bit better.
Yeah,
there you go. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Mostly we're focusing about the Intrepid, but for those who stuck around for the end of the show, thank you so much for listening through. I did want to get some good talk about 4.0 going to PTU, what it means, what people can expect, and we'll be following up with both ships and 4.0 over the next few weeks in these podcasts, Launch Sequence or Citizen Central. You can find them both on Space Tomato 2 if you want. You can join us right here live in Discord. If you are a supporter on any platform, you can come and listen to our gossip before and after, our chats, all that jazz. It's a good group of people. And if you want to get the absolute best stuff, then let me give my friend Tree here a chance to let you know where you can find his own content.
I'm at Tree0311 on YouTube, and then the same thing on Twitch. I'm still on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, Tree0311-SC. And then I have a Discord that's always open. Lots of great conversation. Really great, fun people to hang out with. And I do the Pathfinders podcast, the occasional Armchair Admirals and Generals podcast. I stream Star Citizen gameplay when I can, as well as co-op gameplay with my community, Starship Troopers, Helldivers, that sort of stuff. And I do everything for charity. I keep no monetization for myself. I donate all of it and then some to stackup.org. Hence the t-shirt. So come hang out. Would love to chat with you. I'd love to, and I like to hear other people's thoughts and opinions. And you can only do so much as one person to follow development. And so it's always great to have more eyes, more thoughts, more people, reading things and watching things from different points of view.
Well, thank you, dude, again for joining me, for always the good conversation. Good folks, go check him out if you would like. Give his content a little look, and ultimately, gosh, I'm just getting thrown off by the fact that 4.0 is going to PTU right now. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Yeah, here we go. I hope you all enjoyed the show. Hope to see you next week. Make sure to keep an eye out for videos, podcasts, and more coming out. And thanks again. See y'all later.